Recording started. I'm going to push it again because I'm not sure it went. Keyword Prezi doc? No. It is, no, I think you're in the wrong spot here. We're just getting you a document. Oh, I sent out the wrong one. Okay, that's good. Okay, you're on. All right, so we're going to application share this, right? Or do you want to help me start up the oh, sure. Firefox? Okay. I've got a little bit of feedback issue. Is Firefox up? Yep. There it is. Okay. So here is session. Session view tools. Application sharing, post applications, and we are going here. And exclude menus. There you go. Right, perfect. I guess we would like to be started with my presentation, but okay. Hi everybody. My name is Lene, and not only am I going to show you something that is going to require me to jump back and forth between a lot of different Prezis, which is already making me nervous because you can only run so many Prezis, and then because it's an online service, it will crash. And then we're using someone else's internet service, and they have me on CCC Confirmed. So bear with me and be really supportive. That would be great. But I'm just going to show you here. These are all Prezis that my students are currently working on for my class, my spring class. And so one of the cool things is that I start them and I share them with them, and then they populate them. And so each day I can see how they're populating it, what they're adding, and who's working and who's not working. So for instance, this one right here, how many have to open it? It's empty. Okay, so I can send them a little message and say, it's time to wake up and get your work done. So there's that. Here. Uh-oh. Yeah, and also the resolution on the projector is not set correctly. Okay, so you want to escape out of this? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Oh, you know what we did? We did application sharing. We should have done desktop sharing. That's what I was trying to do. Yeah. All right. Okay. Okay. We're going to be tools. Sorry, everybody. We are going to be okay. Session view. Okay, Lenny. Okay, you should be live and you should be fine. Hopefully you're still. Yes, we're good. Go ahead and say something to make sure you're on here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say something to make sure the audio is still on. Yes, audio is still on. Okay, so the first question is, what is Prezi? And so I'd like to just take a show of hands. If you're online, you can use the poll tool. How many of you have already used Prezi? Very cool, very cool. Okay. How many of you have no idea what Prezi is? Okay, that's okay too. So the good thing is I'm not going to teach you how to use Prezi today, and that's the good thing for me. And also, I'm not going to really use. I'm not going to show you the bells and whistles of Prezi. it's an online Zooming presentation editor. And that's how they describe themselves. And what that means is, unlike PowerPoint that goes from slide to slide to slide, number one, it's not hosted on your computer. It's on the internet, and so you can access your presentation from anywhere as long as you have internet access. And also, it zooms from place to place. Well, what does that mean? That's what it means. It uses a really cool super zooming spinning transition to add visual excitement to your presentation. And that's why most people are interested in it, because with our current student population getting younger and younger, as I managed to stay the same age, they like the visual appeal to it, they like what they can add to it, and it's fun for them, and it looks pretty good too. If we had a lot of time, I would show you a presentation that I did for my class. I teach communication and critical thinking, and I taught a class on sports and identity. And so I did a really cool Prezi presentation. It's the one that I worked the most hard on because I'm a wordsmith. I'm not a graphics person. I'm not an artist. I'm not a videographer or any of those things. But I made a baseball with all of the information about the class embedded in the baseball. It was very cool, right? Maybe afterwards you can look at it. But for the most part, I'm going to show you the black and white test of what you can do with Prezi that's not really related to presentation software. Okay? So you might be saying, well, what does the Zooming presentation software have to do with critical thinking? And that's what I'm most interested in. I hope you are too. Here's my problem with critical thinking. Teaching for 20 years. And since I was 2, the students throughout those 20 years are showing a lack of brainstorming. They don't want to do brainstorming activities. They want to just sit down and write their paper. They also don't want to use data or evidence from research. I have an entire unit in my class that I do that teaches them the difference between opinion and argument. And it takes an entire week to convince them there's a difference. Okay, so they don't want to use the data and evidence from the research that we're doing. They don't want to think about their organizational patterns. They're very, very resistant to any type of revision that requires them to move their organization around. They don't want to map out their organization before they start an essay. And in a writing class where revision entails moving things around in big ways, I thought, I went to college and I used a typewriter. So I thought, wow, the computer is going to revolutionize the way we write. No, they still sit down and start their essay and write it all the way through, and if you ask them to revise, they spell check, sometimes. So I wanted to know, how can I somehow convince my students that this is all part of critical thinking, and that revising and looking at organizational patterns and looking at our data might be good for all of us. Tell me if the volume is going to be okay.
It's not. You need to stay over there as much as you can.
Okay. So, I happen to be a very physical teacher. It's going to be really hard for me. This is Bloom's taxonomy. I use it a lot in my class. I teach this to my students so they know why I'm pushing them so hard. When we do multiple choice tests, in communication studies we say that when you, when you are teaching, you have a target and you want to belong to another group, which hopefully our students are taking classes because they have some goals, a group they want to belong to eventually down the line. You have to learn how to talk the talk of that group. It's called convergence. So one of the things you want them to do is learn the language. But they learn the language in a very kind of simplistic and superficial way. So they get the knowledge. They can do a multiple choice question and make a line between a word and a definition. But they can't always apply it in a way that moves up toward analysis and synthesis or evaluation. So I'm really interested in anything that I can do that pushes them up forces them to go to the top of that critical thinking pyramid. This is a Bloom's taxonomy that's broken down by verbs. And what I like about it, and what I would point to if I could reach, is that it gives you not only kind of classic verbs for thinking about how your students are thinking and processing, but also this is an Internet Web 2.0 based example.
Use a pointing tool.
Okay. Marty will get me using the pointing tool. This kind of teaching. I'll do it. Okay. So we have here at the bottom here, this is the lowest level of critical thinking, that students can recognize, list, or describe. And if you look at it in a web-based application, that they can do bullet pointing, highlighting, bookmarking. This bullet pointing is what really caught my eye. So when students do a presentation, they know how to use bullets in PowerPoint. They know how to fill up the screen with bullets in PowerPoint, right? They can make a list of things that belong. But I want to push them way, way, way up here to more like mashing and linking and tagging and validating, reverse engineering, and cracking, I think, in my English class. So, brings us back to this problem. Lack of brainstorming, low use of data, inconsistent organization, resistance to revision. What are some of the tools that we can use to help them be less resistant? Okay, so I'm going to move you to a different Prezi. I've given you a handout, and the handout is blank for you to write down the things that you think are really interesting. And what I'm going to do is walk you through some of the features of Prezi that help students do things besides create presentations. Okay? And if in the end your students use this to give a presentation in your class, well, that's a bonus. Okay? But they can use it just as an archive, just as a type of portfolio. And that's one of the things that I want to show you. So the very first one is that low use of data and evidence. And I noticed in a class I teach on social justice that, oh boy, I hope I can find this quick. As we toggle back and forth between these. One of the things that students do is when they're doing their research, they get a printout or they have their book, and even if you teach reading skills, that they highlight. They're really good at highlighting. Sometimes students, I ask them to open up their book, my first year students, and they show me, oh yes, I read, and the entire page is highlighted. Okay, so the entire page is really, really important to them. But that doesn't help them write an essay about it or compare information, because you've highlighted the whole text, you haven't taken out the pieces that might be important to you. So what I started doing was having them log into Prezi. They get a free educational account. I don't work for Prezi. I just use it in my classroom. I feel like a salesperson for Prezi today. And I have them open up a Canvas, and I have them start taking out pieces out of articles that they're reading or resources they're reading in class. They put the title and the author so that they know where the information is coming from. And then they write down the facts that they think are most important to them. I wish I could show you as students one of this, but they create their own Prezi. They don't invite me to this. This is their own kind of brainstorming place. Okay? So I created this one to give you a little sense. And what I want to show you is that Prezi is an infinite canvas. So what you can see, if we edit this, is that you can keep moving and moving and moving and moving and moving, and it just goes on and on and on. So it's like a piece of paper that never ends. As long as you keep writing on it, it keeps giving you space. Right? The other thing is that it allows you to kind of zoom in. So that's called an infinite canvas. This idea that if they're doing a research project or if they're archiving their work, it's like writing an annotated bibliography almost, but they're putting it all on one particular page that they own on Prezi. You can use these tools right here on the side to zoom in or zoom out. So I have an example here. This is a little research project that they do on Walmart, and what I asked them to do is note the article that it's coming from, what is the author's name, and then what are important facts, data, pieces of evidence, or even short summaries that you have captured from this article. Maybe you might use them in a future essay, or maybe you just want to share them with the class because you find them interesting. And I ask them to always include the page number because I do eventually want them to use it in an essay, right? And also, this is it's a presentation, but it's also a workshop. If you have questions, please raise your hand and ask them before we move on to the next piece. Okay. So the Infinite Canvas is really, really important piece for me for students brainstorming and also for the collection of data and evidence, helping them figure out what data and evidence actually is, and also teaching them how to write a concise summary, which is a critical component of critical thinking. If you can't write a concise summary, if your summaries aren't accurate, then you're going to be in trouble, okay? So in this particular one, there's 3 articles, but then also there's a couple of images that might be helpful for doing a presentation on Walmart, okay? So that's the Infinite Canvas. And the other thing is that in Prezi, you can, let me zoom in here, you can grab an element and you can make that element how we're out of editing again, sorry. Bigger or smaller. So as they're entering each one of these pieces, each one of the pieces is an individual editing window. Each quote is an individual window. So if I find that I really think that this Fishman resource is really, really important, one of the things that I can do as a person who owns this is make it bigger, just by clicking on the editing wheel. So I can use visual cues to remind myself that something is more important or less important. And the other thing that I can do is drag them around. So each one of these has been entered separately in a separate editing box. And because they've been entered separately, they're now a separate piece. So I can move it up or down. I can move them around in different places. And so long as I know who my source is, I can then kind of recombine and even start to compare and contrast or use analysis or synthesis of my particular pieces here. Okay, so the students can then say, wow, I read this article over here, and I read this article over here, and both of them are talking about the way that Walmart treats their employees. So if I wanted to write a paper about the way that Walmart treats their employees, I can gather all of this data and evidence and put it over here in a new section called Walmart and Employees. Okay? So where before students have been resistant to revise, now all of a sudden students think revising is fun because they can move things around, right? Let me show you a different example. How many of you use groups in your class? Okay. How many times have you had groups, you've asked them to select by a topic, and students have been very resistant to get in a group based on their topic? Instead might choose a group based on who they like in the class, and then the group goes to present, and one person's presenting about apples, and one person's presenting about dogs. Yes? No? Yes. Okay. So, taking these ideas of the Infinite Canvas and the fact that you can kind of move things around, I wish so I can move stuff on my desktop around. Oh, I'm almost out of batteries. I do have my power cord. Oh my gosh. It's in my bag. Okay, I'll get it. Okay, this would be way, way easier if we could just put a bunch of these up. Okay, this is a brainstorming Prezi that I created in my class while my students were talking about presentations for a big research project that they were doing. And it's really difficult for you to see because they're all pretty small. But as the students were giving their mini presentations, their initial presentation about the topic they were thinking of choosing, I was writing down their name and the topic of their presentation. And this is still in the draft stage. They haven't 100% chosen the topic for their presentation. We put these all up, and then I asked the students to come up and group them together. Okay, so they had time to walk up to the computer, play around, move things around, and see what kinds of groups around what types of topics we could get.
I couldn't find yours. I used mine.
Okay, thank you. So what we ended up with then I don't know if you'll be able to see these. It didn't look like it saved very well either. Is a series of groups where students had not just put themselves in a group, but also placed other students in groups in a way that they thought made sense. And they were all allowed to kind of give their input and revise the groups. And what became very, very clear as they did this was that there were 3 or 4 groups that they had done exactly the job that they said they were going to do, and natural groups formed around specific topics. And they played around with the topics. You can see drugs and alcohol is written in there. They were giving them different titles as they were moving the people around. And then what ended up happening was there were 2 or 3 students whose presentations did not hook into anybody else's topic, giving the students an opportunity before they had invested in a lot of research to revise their topic. And they could revise their topic by looking at other ones and saying, well, that group is full, this group is full, maybe I want to do something over here. And within one particular class session, all of my students had groups, all of them had topics that they were very, very interested in, and all of the groups had a very cohesive central theme that they had all agreed upon. The entire class had agreed upon their theme. They were very, very invested in each other's topics.
Very probably the same thing that they had to choose from some general categories, or did it just randomly develop that way?
Yeah.
A little further.
Yes. Okay, so they actually had a little bit of guidance beforehand because I tried to link, this is my public speaking class, and I try to link them with other classes that they're taking, but they're not all taking the same class. So that's the issue, right? And so they have to kind of, some of them say, well, I have to do this big project in my class, and they try to kind of coalition form, get people to research on something similar, okay? But before I used Prezi to do this, sometimes 3 or 4 weeks into this process, we would still have students without topics and still have students without groups. So this really, kind of helps me get them to brainstorm and plan and get their groups going. And that's just a really simple application I did. I'm not using it for presentation software at all. We're using it as an organizational tool. Okay. All right. Let me show you something else. So is my brainstorming canvas for the presentation that started out our presentation here. And it's very text-based. I wish I could do more with graphics. Someday I'm going to take a graphics design class, and then my prezis will be like these fancy things, right? But my students do way fancier prezis than I do. I use it much more for the brainstorming tool. But you only saw a very, very small portion of this presentation. Because it's an infinite canvas, I can put things off to the side that you never got to see. So all of my notes are kind of attached to my presentation. Students can do the same thing. When they write an essay to me, I never get to see their notes. I never see them, well, unless I require it. However, when they use a Prezi to organize their information before they turn in an essay, I ask that they don't get rid of any of their notes. They keep all of their notes. So if they have information about a source, if they have quotes they've collected from a source that they haven't used, those are all off in the margins of their canvas. And then their outline for their paper, which is a very detailed outline, you can imagine when they've got all this data and evidence listed there, is in the center of their canvas. So we can kind of go through and talk about, well, why didn't you include this piece? When you were reading this resource that you didn't use in your essay, why did you think it didn't fit in with your topic? And ask questions to get them to think about what they included and why they included it, what they left out and why they left it out. Okay? Some interesting things have come up. In my first year class, some of my students say, well, you said there only had to be 3 sources. Right? So they've got this great piece of data that they haven't used because I said there only had to be 3 sources. I point out to them all the time, minimum 3 sources. You can kind of go over a minimum threshold there, right? And so that's very, very interesting.
I have a question about how you track how effectively they're using it or if they're using it.
Okay, so the question is, how do I track how effectively they're using it? And I have to say, the first time I advised them to use Prezi, I didn't track it at all. But the next time I advised them to use it, and we used it as a brainstorming tool, we had a workshop in class, and we sat down, the groups looked at each other's Prezi, they had to do a small kind of informal presentation about what they were doing, and they're reading the same text, and so they share a lot of their notes about the text.
Linda Horrence online asked, how do asynchronous groups use Prezi?
Okay, so right now we haven't even talked about groups yet, so this is just like, it is an asynchronous tool. Okay, so they're using it all on its own, and really I'm talking about how I've used it in my face-to-face classes so far. Haven't even talked about how we use it in online courses. Okay, so the next step then is to say, here's how you can do it in your face-to-face course. How can you do it in your online course? And I'm not quite ready to answer that question, okay, because we're not quite there. Another question in the back?
I just had a question. You have them brainstorm, and then are they doing their outline in Word and then pasting it in, or you're letting them create their full outline right in there?
Yes. Okay, so what they do to create their outline is that they create the outline structure and they drag the information that they want into the outline. Okay, so the first outline that they do is very, very rough. Okay, very, very rough outline. It gets more and more detailed as they go along, and then let me show you something else. Okay, so you can use the spatial layout. If you think that something is marginalized, you can put it off to the side, or if you think it's central, you can move it to the center. You can also make something bigger if you think it's important. So as major themes start to arise in your work, even if it's a piece of data, you can start making it bigger so that those themes become evident when you're looking at the information. This helps students organize and help them develop their thesis even, because they can start to see patterns emerging out of what they're interested in by making it bigger or making it smaller. Okay? And what they can do is start gathering things together in groups, and then you can actually move an entire group of information around. Okay, and you can do that a couple of ways. One, you can just shift and create a box, and move it. Or if you think it's more permanent, you can put a frame around it. Okay, so we could frame, if it was working, we could frame this stuff right here, create the frame around it, and you simply move it. Okay? So those really help students develop better organizational skills. And now I'm going to show you a little something for the online courses. So because it's web-based, they can invite you to view this. They can make it public and send you the URL, or you can create a meeting so that it's not public. And a lot of them, especially with a draft, they don't want to make it public. So what they can do is they can come into meeting and invite you to edit. And then it creates a URL with an authentication key, and you and the student can have access to it. And the cool thing is that you can go in there and you can write all kinds of notes to them within their organizational structure, just like you were writing on a piece of paper. And once they're done looking at your notes, they can either move them to the side if they want to keep them and they want to archive it. They can just drag your note over to the side. Or they can click on that editing wheel. Watch me delete something really important. They can click on an editing wheel, and they can simply put it in the trash can. Okay? So if they have something they don't want anymore, they can just drop it in the trash can. I strongly encourage them, because of the infinite canvas, to keep everything. Just kind of push it off to the side, drag it over to the side. Occasionally, I have to admit, when I first started using Prezi, I lost something. Zooming in and out, I made something really tiny and couldn't find it again. I was like, didn't I put that in there already? Where is that? And it turned out that it was a microscopic fly on the edge of the canvas. But that's kind of fun, you go on a little treasure hunt through your canvas. Okay, so this also is a really useful online tool, and this is why I started using it in my online classes. It started out something I was doing in my face-to-face classes. And then I started thinking, wow, if we could do this with groups, I could make the groups meet asynchronously in Prezi. And then they could add information to their Prezis. Wouldn't that be a great way to get them to collaborate? They don't have to be there synchronously. Up to 10 people can be editing at any given time. And what I think is one of the best features is there's a 1-week limit on editing. So you can renew editing privileges. When that 1 week is up, you can reissue them editing privileges and they can continue working on a project. So you don't have students, because of that 1 week deadline, you don't have students who, after the deadline, are trying to add things to their presentation at the last minute. Okay? So I want to show you one of the things that happened. The first time I did it, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just making a guess and hoping that it worked. And I wanted my students to give online presentations. So what I did is I assigned one person in their group the editing privileges. So they had to meet some other way. Yeah, they had to meet some other way. They could use the chat. They could use the discussion forum. They could meet face-to-face if they were close to campus, whatever the group decided, to make their presentation. And then one person loaded the presentation. I wasn't thinking 100% through here. And all of the groups entered their presentations on the same canvas. Okay, that way, every group could see everybody else's presentation, because that's kind of what I was aiming for, right? So the problem was that only 10 people can edit at a time, right? And so that's the way I kind of worked through that little issue. Well, the first group put up their presentation 48 hours before the deadline. And it was a 2-week project. So I thought that was kind of cool that someone was posting that early. So I went online and I looked, and it sucked. And I was like, okay, I know that I was stretching them. I know I kind of introduced this project kind of late in the game and everything else, but this is not good. And so I sent an email to the whole class, and I said, so cool if someone put their rough draft up. Imagine how cool this is going to be when they do all of the criteria for the assignment, right? And then, like, 10 hours later, way before, well, you know, for my class, way before the deadline. If it's 24 hours before, you know, I consider that way before the deadline. I look, and what I see is that some of the groups have started to do really cool things. Like, they weren't supposed to do anything but add the pieces to their presentation. And those included summaries of the articles that they wrote, responses to the articles. They each wrote a series of articles, and they had to present specific pieces to the class. And all of a sudden, one of the groups adds like this little, I don't know if you can really see it, a little mouse shape. Okay? And then all of a sudden I look, everybody's got frames, right? No one had frames before, everybody's got frames. And then I see someone's got a castle. They're making a castle out of theirs. Okay, now, if they were just playing with Prezi, it would have been, okay, aw, isn't that cute, right? But as they're adding these other little pieces, they're adding content. All of a sudden they're realizing, oh, we forgot our bibliography. We better put our reference page in here. None of the groups up until the third group had put their names, right? There was no names on any of them. All of a sudden, like in an hour, all of the presentations had names on them. And then overwhelmingly, when I do this project, there's always people that leave off pieces. It has like 6 or 7 different pieces that they have to add. You can see all the little squares that they had done, right? It's never been graphically based. It's always been text-based. And it ends up to be kind of like a report that they do for the class. And then they make a PowerPoint presentation, and people can view their PowerPoint presentation online. I've never even done it with voice, which Michelle will probably be very upset with me. So here they have really kind of looked at each other's work, said, oh my gosh, this group has this, we didn't do that. And it's not only the visual appeal of it, but it's also the content pieces of it. And you can see the one that has the least graphical pieces to it, this one right here, is also the one that has the least content pieces to it, interestingly enough. Okay? So this one right here. Okay?
That's the first one that was posted.
No, the first one that's posted is this one right here. Ends up being this beautiful tree with, and it was missing a ton of those pieces. Okay? Had no reference page, had no names. They had to take out key terms from the sources that they read, and they hadn't made a list of key terms even. So, yeah.
But you keep them from, you do let them, or you encourage them not to do these sort of stuff?
Yeah, not this particular group. The groups that use the entire Canvas as their research pieces, I asked them not to delete their pieces. But these groups were just doing a presentation. This actually was for a presentation.
So is each one of those a presentation?
Yes.
And they're different groups?
Yes.
Each frame represents a...
Yes. So we've got 5 groups here representing 28 students, and each one of the frames is a separate group, all on one canvas. Yeah.
You said that's a castle, that's actually a cat.
Okay. I thought it was a castle. All right. Yeah. Okay.
The castle with 6 drawbridges?
Yeah.
Where you were going with
Does it relate to the presentation?
No, the animals do not relate to the presentation. Okay. Nonetheless, what's interesting is that they came up, and the reason why I thought it was a castle is the unit before this we had done on Disney. Okay, so I thought that they were kind of like dragging in elements of Disney, but right, I thought it was because
I think the cat made the cat eat the mouse.
Yeah, you're totally right, but I interpreted it as Mickey Mouse and Disneyland.
Well,
It's a good thing I didn't grade them on that.
The frames, animals are those from frame.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's an enhancement.
Oh, no, they drew those animals. No, they drew those animals. Yeah, they used the Prezi tools to draw those animals. Yeah.
Not a free.
No, believe me, I'm not a graphics person. Yeah, they used the Prezi. Ricardo.
Oh, I thought you had to castle, like.
Yes, Ricardo said, I said that this was a capsule. Yes, I had said that. Thank you for saving me. Yes, my friends, my colleagues, thank you for saving me. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I just want to kind of, there's tutorials online for Prezi, and so I don't feel obligated to teach you Prezi, but instead to pique your interest today, to get you thinking about how we can use tools like this that are free and online to help our students kind of reconceive the way that they create information and to really get them thinking about the data that they're collecting and the tasks that we're asking them to do and using it in creative ways. Okay? And I think the creative element of this, even though it was totally unexpected that they made a mouse, and the mouse was the first animal, helped them see that there were elements that they needed to do. Okay? And I also think, it's that zone of proximal distance. They're looking at each other's work, they're teaching each other how to do it, and then in this case, this was the final project for this class, they were trying to one-up one another. And a healthy competition is not bad if it sends them into that entrepreneurial spirit where they're trying to create something interesting. Okay? So a really interesting piece of Prezi then is this idea that you can have group editing, that you can invite each other to see your work, and that you can get feedback on your work that can either be saved or once you're done reading it, you can revise and eliminate that feedback. Okay. One other thing for Prezi that I wanted to show you, maybe if we could just go back to, apparently not. How many people in your online classes try to teach students what they can ethically take off of the internet and not take off of the internet? Okay. How many of you try to teach them how to use Creative Commons and what attribution means? So I do, and especially in my public speaking classes, it's really, really important to me. They cannot use an image unless it's their own, unless they have cited where it comes from and have permission to use the image in any of the various ways that you gain permission. So the nice thing about Prezi is it causes my students so much stress. When they use Prezi, I can just write right in there. I teach a hybrid public speaking class. Where did the image come from? I can just leave them a note. Where's your image come from? Okay? Before anybody else sees it, before it's graded or anything else, tell me where your image came from. But the other cool thing about Prezi is that it allows you to zoom way out here. Insert all of these different types of things. So if you have a file in your own files, whether it's a picture file or a PDF file or a Word document, you can upload it straight into your Prezi. But it also has a direct link to YouTube. So one of the things that I ask my students to do in my public speaking class is an analysis of a speech. And they often, in my face-to-face classes, forget to tell me the speech that they watched. So they'll analyze the speech that they watched on YouTube, and they won't tell me anything about the speech. I can't go, well, I can Google it, but okay. So the cool thing about this is that they can put their speech right into it. So, I'm doing the wrong thing here. It's just the URL. All right, you'll have to believe me. you put the URL for your YouTube right in here, and it embeds the YouTube into Prezi. So I've done one here. There's something about Walmart in here. Oh, it's in the Walmart one, not this one. Okay. So you can embed the YouTube video right into Prezi. And in PowerPoint, some of you encountered this in your class. You're giving a PowerPoint presentation, you've embedded a YouTube video, you've ported it to a different device, you press the video, nothing happens. Nothing goes. Okay? This is web-based. When you hit the next button and forward it on to the next slide, it automatically starts the YouTube video. And when it's done, it automatically pauses it. It doesn't start playing again. So you can go right on to your next slide. It's a really cool feature. And then the other thing that you can do is you can search for images, and it will only show you images that are available to be used. It doesn't show you anything that has a copyright on it or it should not be used by you. So there's no copyrighted content. So your students can look through those images, and it's almost like having a little Creative Commons database embedded right into Prezi. Yeah. Some of them are not great, but some of them are. Okay, so especially stock stuff. Okay, so one final thing I want to show you, and this is one of the most important tools that I use for my writing classes, which is after you have got all of your information together, you do something called setting a path. And I'm just going to go over here, completely get rid of this whole thing, by clearing all of the paths. So the presentation that I showed you earlier is now gone, the order of the slides that I showed you. Instead, what is left is my canvas. And each and every time I show this, I can clear this path and make a new presentation. And it's as easy as just clicking on the piece that you want to be next. So when my students are taking that outline that they've created in that research class and trying to decide what their essay is going to look like, the first thing that I have them do is create paths. Okay, so tell me, so they don't have to create a linear outline, tell me, in your essay, how are you going to talk about this? And they set the paths, and then it goes in order, and they can do a little presentation saying, first I'm going to talk about this, and then I'm going to talk about this, and then I'm going to talk about this. And if I say, well, what do you think about bringing in this information? Or why did you talk about this before this? All they have to do is say, oh, what would that look like if I talked about this first? Okay? And they can see the organization of their essay. They can even break their paragraphs up into pieces. So if you have a student who's having a really difficult time structuring a paragraph, you can literally divide their paragraph up into pieces and have them move things around and see how that paragraph reads by moving the whole sentence around. Okay. Yeah.
I kind of abandoned working in Prezi. I found tasks so difficult. So this seems to be an enhancement from when I used to that. I'm like, okay, I can go back to this. I couldn't make the links just go away. So having this side frame, it didn't happen when I left.
So Prezi used to have the paths along the bottom, and you actually have to scroll down to the bottom to see the paths. So if you didn't watch the tutorial, you wouldn't know that. And so once the paths were set, you're like, and then it's always had this feature. If I decide I don't want this slide here, if I decide if I'm creating an essay and I don't want that piece there, the little red X appears and you can hover over it, and then you just press the X and the slide goes away. Yeah.
That the slide goes away. I kept having trouble, and I thought I had done the tutorial, but I kept, my content would go away.
Your content would go away?
But I knew that it was me. But I got so frustrated, I stopped.
Yeah, well, when you're really frustrated by technology, you should stop.
Yeah.
But then you should go back.
Yeah. That's why I came today, because I thought, well, maybe somebody knows seeing it again.
I'll tell you, Ricardo will tell you, he's my instructional designer. Saved my life 1,000 times. I am a technophobe, okay? I married an engineer. Sometimes I have to call him and say, my computer won't go on. Well, have you tried turning it on and off? That's from IT Prep. I understand that feeling of, okay, what is this technology? When I took Michelle's class, I was the one, I told her it took days for me to sit down and do my first voice thread, but I had challenged myself. I was going to do the video voice thread from the very beginning. And I sat down, had what I was going to say all planned out, turned on the machine, and it's showing my video at me, right? And I was in my robe, and my hair was like, oh my gosh! So, yeah, technology is, something that I need help with, and I can somehow manage, But my presentations are pretty plain and simple, right? But what I have done with Prezi with my students with brainstorming and really getting them to challenge themselves about the essays that they write, the presentations that they give, it's been a big breakthrough for me, and so I'm sharing it. Yeah. Other questions? Questions online or questions from the class?
Can you invite your whole class to see your Prezi?
Yes, you can make your Prezi public. Yeah, you can make your Prezi public.
You can invite 30 people.
Yes, you can also make it private, right, and give them the URL, just like a YouTube, right? So if they have the URL, they can come see it, or you can make it 100% locked. So the only person that can see it is you, the only person that can display it is you.
But if you give them the URL, can they edit?
No. You have to give them editing privileges for them to edit it.
Can you embed your whole Prezi into your website?
So I'm not 100% positive anymore because I went ahead and paid for the Prezi Pro tool. For an educator, it's $60 a year. And I was using it so much that I kind of felt, well, for one thing, occasionally I would need to work on one of my Prezis and I wouldn't have internet access. My son's a basketball player, and most community colleges don't allow you to have access to their internet. So when I'm sitting in a gym all day watching basketball games, I can't access their internet. And so I downloaded the software. So then I can work on it online. When I turn on my computer again, it syncs, and it's great.
Can you embed it in your website?
I don't know if you can from online because I have the Pro tool. Yeah.
Okay.
You can.
HTML. Just do it in HTML and just embed it like in a WordPress account or something like that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Google it. There are tutorials that show you that.
Perfect. Thank you.
So he tells me when I ask him questions too. None. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I'm working with a really resistant group right now, and but you can see that one group literally has not put anything into their Prezi. They still have 9 days before it's due. Okay, they haven't put anything into their Prezi. But overall, this entire class really resisted going in and doing their Prezi. They set up conferences on PC Confer to give their presentations, and so I'm like, okay, you're gonna have an empty presentation, right? But once one person starts posting, they all start posting. And the tutorials are very, very straightforward, and it looks complex right now, what you see, but it's not. It's really easy to use. My learning curve for this was much quicker than when I did PowerPoint, when I learned PowerPoint. Oh, thank you. So we have 5 more minutes for questions.
Have you seen any differences in the quality of either presentations or the quality of your students' work now that you've introduced this as a tool and you not have enough time under your belt with it to really make that determination?
In my writing classes, I would say that I saw dramatic improvement right away. And some of my students elected not to use Prezi, and those are hybrid and face-to-face classes, so I have more interaction with them. But the feedback that I got from using it the first time was the students who said to me, I've always had writer's block. I wrote this essay like it was flying off of my fingers. Okay? So this may not be the tool that helps every single student, but that's kind of the beauty of technology, is that there's not one tool that's going to help every student. There's not one tool that's great for every instructor. But if this is a way that we can get our students to kind of think critically, then we can try it, right? As far as presentations are concerned, I still have students, this is the first time I've said that everybody has to use Prezi. And so I still have groups that use PowerPoint and upload PowerPoint slides. And I would say that their presentations are not as well thought out. They're just not as well thought out. I have one more example to show you. Do I still have?
Oh yeah, no, that was I was just reminding everybody to please fill out the evaluation. And also, at 5 o'clock, at the far end of the lake, is the wine and beer reception, and we're going to have volley with dress dancing. You might want to get a little south before we do the volley.
Okay, so in my interpersonal communication class, students can write an essay for their relationship model, or they can create a PowerPoint, or they can create anything they want. I tell them they can do any medium they want. And after doing a couple other things in Prezi, the student decided to do his relationship model in Prezi. And when they do them in PowerPoint, because PowerPoint, lets you have that kind of bulleted, encapsulated piece, they're not very deep. This is an interpersonal communication class, and you're being asked to analyze 3 of your most important relationships, and people put like 3 bullet points. So here's my relationship with my mom, there's 3 bullet points. Here's my relationship with my boyfriend, there's 3 bullet points. Like, wow. Dig, right? So this person did it in Prezi, and it's amazing. So, you don't see this at first, you just see. So he goes over, number 1, the model that they were given in class. So this is just a summary of the actual theory about relationship models. So he summarized the theory down here. I know. And then he goes to his first relationship in college. And you can see for each stage that he's learned in the model, he now has what some people would put all of the stages on one PowerPoint slide. He has a separate circle for each one of them. And as you're viewing this and as he's presenting it, you're not seeing that big picture. You're just seeing, that he's going up someplace, right? And then down. Okay. And then you get that it's a mountain, right? Okay. But then he's got a whole little essay about the dialectical tensions, which the dialectical tensions is part of this, but people often do it as a separate PowerPoint slide, and they put a couple bullets. And he has text to describe this. And then he does a reflection, which is not even required. Okay. Then he goes to his second relationship. Okay, and we don't know, what this is, but we see it's all downhill. And when we're done with it, we see and then his discussion of the tension. And, by the way, they have to find one dialectical tension in the relationship, and he's done 2. Right? And this was not a student who beforehand had done, some, great stellar work. Okay? And then the final relationship. Yeah, this is his wife. Yeah.
So far.
He seems pretty reflective.
Well, he got a face.
Yeah. And then afterwards, he does this analysis and then includes a family narrative, which is extra credit. Okay? And then when you're all done, right? So for him, this piece was, I'd never had a presentation like this. I was like, oh my goodness. If the tool is what got him there, then people should have access to the tool. Maybe it's not going to get every student to do this, but boy, it sure made him think about all of the components of the requirements. And yeah.
How do you deal with students who collapse under the fear of the tool?
So this is the first time I've ever made it mandatory that everyone has to use Prezi. And the reason why I did it in groups is because they have other communication tools for their groups in their class. So they can chat with each other and they can help each other through. plus, one of the things we didn't even talk about is that if your students, it's asynchronous. If your students are in the Prezi workspace synchronously, they get like a little Wii character, and their Wii characters walk around and drag the stuff, and so they know if somebody else is in there from their group editing, and they can choose to go in there and help each other with it. And so far, I've had 2 students who back-channeled me and said, I don't know Prezi, I don't get it, blah, 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 blah. And I told them to watch the tutorial. One of them, I talked to her on the phone for like 10 minutes. We talked, and she was completely over it, and I saw her draft, and it looked pretty darn good. It looked pretty good. She included photos, and yeah, one of which I had to leave for a little note to say, don't forget your attribution. Thank you all so much.